Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Wise Guys podcast. I am Brandon Capozziello, as always. If you were watching the stream earlier, thank you for watching. Please give us a like, subscribe to the channel if you're new, share the content with your friends and family. Really appreciate it, and we really love you for it. And who doesn't love love? I love love, you love love, we all love love. Love is love, and let's just love it. You know what I mean? McDonald's, I'm loving it. Let's go. But I am back to discuss a pay-per-view this Saturday night in the States, Sunday afternoon down under in Sydney, Australia. UFC 293 is what I am talking about. Headlined by the one and only, the middleweight king, Israel Adesanya, for the middleweight championship, taking on Sean Strickland. Now I'm going to dive into the pay-per-view. I'm only going to really talk about the co-main event and main event because I'm going to get into a little bit more why, but I just think the UFC really dropped the ball with this card, and I'm going to get into that after I talk about the fights and predict them. Then I'm going to give you a couple of fun topics I've been contemplating, thinking about. I'm a big fan of the MMA Hour. Shout out Ariel Hawani. And I know he's said this, and I know a couple of people have said this in the MMA community. Can Bellator champs really beat the some of the current UFC champions? I'm going to talk about that, and then I'm going to give you the final 5 fights that I believe, if everything goes correctly, in John Jones's illustrious GOAT career. But first, let's talk about UFC 293, headlined by Izzy versus Strickland. If you see on the thumbnail, you'll notice it says in big letters, his greatest performance. And I truly do believe that. I believe Israel Adesanya is going to put on his greatest performance yet. I think back to Anderson Silva's front kick to the face, right? That moment. That's what it might not necessarily be a front kick to the face, right? But that's what I perceive is going to happen on Saturday night. I believe Izzy is going to have his standout performance. I know his last performance against Alex was phenomenal, but it was more of just, a right hand. It wasn't anything. It was spectacular in and of itself, but the actual shots weren't spectacular. So that's what I expect from Izzy this Saturday night, is his most spectacular performance yet. Listen, I like Sean Strickland. He's a character. He says some wild shit, but he's a very good fighter. Is he championship caliber? No, he's not. He's a guy who's going to fight, the up and comers. He can be in the top 10. He's a very good striker, very good boxer. Not much of a kicker. Doesn't really like to engage in the wrestling. He'll clinch here and there. He's got very good takedown defense. Tough, gritty, in your face, gonna pressure you. But Izzy's seen this style before. Izzy knows what he's going up against. And I just truly believe that this is set. I mean, we all know this was supposed to be Dricus versus Izzy, right? And Dricus declined the fight. And Izzy's kind of playing with him a little bit, saying, I might not give you the next title shot. I might give it to Hamzat, who I believe is going to beat Paulo Costa. I think he's just playing with Dricus. I believe the smartest decision for Izzy would be you beat Strickland on Saturday, you fight Dricus next, hopefully in Australia, and then next up would be the big fight against Hamzat for the championship, because that I believe is going to be his toughest test with the wrestling. But I believe Izzy's going to get the job done. I'm predicting him to win within the first 2 rounds, either round 1 or round 2. The only reason I'm not stamping home a round 1 finish is because what's different between Alex and Izzy is, to me, is Izzy is more of a sharpshooter. He's a sniper. While he's got power, it's more precision over power, speed and timing over just brute force. While Alex is more just, I can hit you with one shot and knock you out, which Izzy can, but he's just got to find the shot. Alex will just throw on you and it's going to knock you out. So for Izzy, it might take him a little bit longer. So that's why I say in round 1 or 2, he's going to get the finish. Yeah, I expect his this will be Israel Adesanya's greatest performance in the UFC, beating Sean Strickland by finish and retaining his championship and fighting Dricus du Plessis, hopefully in not Australia, in Africa next year. And in the co-main event, fan favorite, boy is back. Tai Tuivasa, who took a real bad beating in his last fight against Cyril Gane. It was bad. It was bad. Just everything was getting beat up. His legs, his body, his head. It was bad. Dropped him once, but it was just bad. It was bad. He's taking on Alexander Volkov, 6'7" giant. Everybody's predicting this ain't going to the scorecards, and I'm right along with it. I don't see this fight going to the judges. I think Tai is going to put the pressure on Volkov. I think he's going to find the button. I think he's going to touch it multiple times. I think Volkov's going to go down. He'll have a little trouble early on, obviously dealing with the range and push kicks and whatnot. But I think Ty's a guy who's not going to just sit there and be technical with you. He's going to go for it. He's going to go for the blow, and he's going to look to knock your head off your shoulders. And I think he's going to do that, especially in Australia, surrounded by his people. You're not being Tai Tuivasa in that arena, in that venue. I got Tai by TKO or KO. That's the bet. Those would be my two big bets for that I'm placing is Izzy finishing within rounds 1 or 2 and Tai Tuivasa by TKO or KO. So next up, I wanted to talk about and why I'm not covering most of the rest of the card is because I don't, and it's no offense to the fighters. I guess a little bit is, but it's more offense to the promotion and not being prepared. And they've done this lately. They did this with when they had the 3 Mexican champions and Moreno, Grasso, and Yair. I know he was interim champion, but still not being able to capitalize and be in Mexico. They're doing it on Mexican Independence Day in next week or 2 weeks from less than 2 weeks from now. Kind of makes up for it. It's in Vegas. It's not in Mexico or something like. I just feel like not capitalizing on these things. They the Boston card recently didn't have anybody from the New England cartel on it. Didn't have Joe Lozon. A lot of cards lately that have been like market central they have missed on, and it's kind of obvious at this point. And this Australia card is a perfect example of it too. I mean, we got, and I understand the reasons why they're not on the card, but it's also you got to be prepared for this. Like you got to know that this fight card's coming up in this venue, and we've got to be prepared to put the right fighters on this card. So when you're in Australia, you obviously want Izzy, right? You want to Tai Tuivasa, and you like the other guys that can kind of fight on the undercard for the Tyson Pedros and the Tafas and those and the Olbergs and whatnot, right? Those guys. But to fill out the main card and the main event of the prelims, I mean, no Volkanovski, no Whitaker, no Jack De La Maddalena. That's I always get to JDM. No Casey O'Neill, no Jimmy Crute. It's just you're missing out on these Dan Hooker, Kai Car. I know Kai was supposed to be on this card, but no Kai Car fans, no Dan Hooker. All these guys are not on this card, and it's just I understand why they're not. It's just bad planning by the UFC again. With the Mexicans, now with the Australians, with the Boston card. It's disappointing to see them drop the card, and that's why I'm hoping they do something with Zhang and Yan, because that deserves to be in China. So they got to do that. They can't drop the ball there. And the big one, the African, when they had the 3 African world champions, Usman, Izzy, and Francis, couldn't get to Africa. And I feel like it's just because Dana's waiting on the PI to be built, and that's when he wants to go there. Because I believe they're unveiling the Mexico PI very soon, if I'm not mistaken. It's just like who gives a fuck about the PI? You can capitalize and have the market now and make the money now. Because if you don't, you see what happens. You got Brandon Moreno loses his championship. Yair loses the interim championship and doesn't become undisputed. Grasso's still the champ, but She's going up against Shevchenko, which is one of the toughest fights you can go up against. She's the underdog, I believe. Grasso is. I just feel like the UFC is consistently dropped the ball lately with these market central cards for these fighters. The Australia card, Boston, Africa. Hopefully, don't drop the ball with China. It's disappointing. It's disappointing. You gotta strike where the iron's hot, and they haven't lately, and they miss. And where I'm not saying they're losing money or anything, it just sucks from a fan's point of view, and for people in those markets not being able to see this live. It sucks, and I just hope that they do a better job with it going forward. The first thing would be Yan Xiaonan taking on Zhang Weili in China. I know Tatiana honestly deserves a shot, but you got to do that China card first. You have to capitalize on it. You got to make right. And the next would be Dricus versus Izzy in Africa. That fight has to happen in Africa. I know Izzy wants to be on UFC 300, but Africa or UFC 300, you got to. I would take the Africa card. I think it's going to be massive. I think it would be huge. Get Usman on that card too. I feel like Dana's got to get that done. That was my little rant on UFC not getting the job done. So next up, I wanted to discuss a hot topic, right? That goes around every once in a while, but especially getting some traction lately. Can the Bellator champs beat the UFC champions? Now let's pull up because I have the UFC champions pulled up. Let's go to rankings. I don't want to. All right, we're going to start with bantamweight. Can the Bellator world champions beat the UFC world champions? Starting off with bantamweight. Sergio Pettis would fight Sugar Sean O'Malley. Sorry, Sergio. I think the length and the height is going to be a real negative for him. I would take Sugar in that fight, especially what he just did to Aljo. You got to take Sugar. You got to. Next up, Alexander Volkanovski taking on Patricio Pitbull. How can you go against Volk at this point? How can you? I know Pitbull, kind of just went for his third championship, and he's considered the Bellator GOAT. But how can you go against Volkanovski at this point? How? You can't. Seeing what he's done, beating Max 3 times, even if you think, which I do, Max won. I believe he won the first 2 fights, but take one, give one. Who gives a fuck? He dominated in that third fight. And that's all that really matters at this point. Because what have you done for me lately? Yes, did he lose to Islam? You think Patricio Pitbull would have been able to compete with Islam? I really don't believe so. Volkanovski showed something different. Volkanovski's flying at a different stratosphere right now. You can't bet against Volk. Volk would beat Patricio. Would it be a finish? Maybe not, but I just don't see how you can vote against Volk right now. Next one, Islam Makhachev, lightweight champion, would take on Usman Nurmagomedov. Now, I'm assuming that there's levels to this in the camp where these guys train at, aka, and I would assume Islam is on a higher level. That's what I would assume, So I would have to go with Islam Makhachev would beat Usman. I feel like there's a pecking order, and Islam is probably the number 2 guy to Khabib. Next up, welterweight. This would probably be the toughest one. Leon Edwards taking on Yaroslav Amosov. Now, if you don't know anything about Amosov, he's 27-0. Speaking of Khabib, that is very akin to Khabib. Khabib 29, Amosov 27. Now, we did just see Leon Edwards beat Kamaru Usman, one of the, best world champions, arguably. he's up there. I don't consider him a top 10 fighter of all time, but he is up there in that conversation. You saw Edwards land that head kick and knock him out. Then you saw him say, "Nah, that wasn't a fluke," which I thought it was, and he proved me wrong and he shut me up. In the second fight, he beat Usman straight up. This is a tough one for me. I don't want to sound like I'm like a UFC shill, but if Leon could beat Usman, I just feel like he could beat Amosov. I just truly feel that. I'm not super familiar with Amosov, okay? But if I had to, from what I remember of him, I don't know if he's as physically strong as Kamaru Usman. Maybe his wrestling is probably better, but I don't know if he's physically as strong. I have to lean Leon. I have to lean Leon. You have to. Next up would be the middleweight. The guy that's fighting this weekend. Israel Adesanya would be taking on Johnny Eblen. Again, this is another situation. How can you bet against Izzy? How can you bet against Izzy? I feel like the guy that's kind of being appointed, the guy to uncrown Izzy is Hamzat. We have to get to that point, but how can you bet against Izzy at this point? I don't think Johnny Eblen, very good fighter, 13-0, undefeated. I know he got a big win over Gegard Mousasi, who's one of the best. But how can you go against Izzy right now? He's flying on another stratosphere just like Volk. Just like Volk. Now, light heavyweight is a little interesting because there is currently no light heavyweight champion in the UFC. It was Jamal Hill. I think Nemkov could beat Jamal Hill. I don't think he beats Yuri. I think Yuri gets the job done. And if I'm not mistaken, I'm almost positive those two have fought before, Nemkov and Yuri. I just want to double check. Was it Nemkov he fought? Yes, he did. All right. He beat him back in Ryzen. Yeah, they fought once. So I would take, and different fighter. It's been years since that, but I would take Yuri, but I would take Nemkov over Corey Anderson for the light heavyweight division. Next up would be the heavyweights. I don't think there's any question here. John Jones would smash Ryan Bader. Point blank, period. Next up, women's flyweight. No more Shevchenko reigning supreme, even though Liz Carmouche has a victory over Shevchenko, and Shevchenko reverted that wrong and got the win back over Carmouche. Alexa Grasso versus Carmouche. I'm high on Alexa Grasso, and I think if you're able to beat Valentina, a recent Valentina who's arguably the greatest fighter of all time, I don't think you can go against Alexa Grasso. I would go Alexa Grasso beating Liz Carmouche. And then finally, well, actually that's it because there is no featherweight division in the UFC anymore, and there's no bantamweight division in Bellator. So, and we all know that Amanda Nunes would beat Chris Cyborg because she did it once and she'd do it again. So that wraps up. I don't see it. You know, I see obviously some good fights with Patricio against Volk, but I don't see how you can go against Volk. Amosov versus Leon, that's going to be a great fight, but I don't know how you can go against Leon when you've seen him, what he can do to Usman. Maybe this is my, UFC paralysis or whatever you want to call it talking, but I just don't know how you see these Bellator champions beating the UFC champions. Some of them can compete, and I would love to see the fights to, end this story, but I don't know how you can pick against them. All right, final topic of today. And then I'll be completely out of your hair. Got a lot of me today. If everything goes right, this is who I believe John Jones's last 5 fights will be in his career. We obviously got Stipe Miocic coming up in November. After that should be Sergey Pavlovich. Then Tom Aspinall, the rising star of the heavyweight division. And again, if everything goes right, if Almeida is able to work his way up and get to that level, that would be the 4th fight that I believe John Jones should take And then his final fight of his career, if everything turns out correctly, his last fight of his career, I do believe this fight will happen eventually. Jon Jones versus Francis Ngannou. I believe the fight happens. I believe the fight happens under the UFC umbrella. Ngannou has already said that his deal with the PFL is a shorter term deal than what we thought. I think it's maybe 2 years, a small amount of fights. You wrap those up, you make that big ass money, you're fighting Tyson Fury, you make a hella money. After all that, you're like, what's left? Legacy. Unfinished business. Jon Jones. And I know there's a lot of rumors Jon might be retiring after, UFC 295. Yeah, UFC 295. I don't know. I don't think so. I think that competitor in him is going to want to stay. Now, I said everything goes right. Obviously, I want Aspinall versus Pavlovich, and I believe Aspinall gets the job done. So that would obviously take that out. And Jolton Almeida has a lot of work to do. He's ranked 9th right now. He's got to work up there, get some wins. But those are the 5 fights that I would love to see for Jon Jones, especially the cap off with Ngannou. I believe it has to happen. Call me a sucker or whatever, but I believe it's got to happen. So, yeah, that wraps up my UFC 293 talk, my UFC talk, my Jon Jones talk, my UFC Bellator champs talk. Sorry, Bellator fans. It's just, it is what it is. There's levels to this game. Yeah, it just is what it is. And I know the comebacks and whatever. It's fine. It's fine. But that wraps up this episode. Not even episode, a special edition, I guess I would say. I just wanted to bring it to you guys. If you stayed along, if you liked the video, please give us a thumbs up. It really helps out. We appreciate it a lot. Me and Justin. Subscribe, share it with your friends and family. Share it on social media. Tell your friends about us. We're just here to have a good time. We're just a show by the fans for the fans. Shooting the shit, talking sports. I want to record more. I want to talk MMA more. I want to talk pro wrestling more. I love pro wrestling. Football, obviously, coming up. Basketball coming up in a month and a half time. 2 months, basically. It's going to be exciting coming days, coming months, and future for the Wise Guys. Stay tuned. The best is yet to come because we're bringing it. We're going to come hard. Hard. Real hard. But that wraps up my UFC 293 talk. Thank you for watching. Again, give us a thumbs up, subscribe, share the content, hit that notification bell to be notified every time we go live and we post a video. And thank you for watching. As Justin says, stay classy. And as I say, late as Gators.